So what we're going to do today, just as a follow-on to our session yesterday, is we're going to go through a hands-on session with Incorta. I'm going to have you really walk through a lot of this process right here. And we're going to connect into a data source. We're going to pull some data in. We're going to, as Randy was showing yesterday, enrich some of that data out. We will, I say simplify, but really we're going to enrich. I'm going to add content. We're going to throw a formula in here. We'll play a little bit and then build out some analyses, some insights. The intention here is to give you an idea of what it feels like to work with Incorta and what it feels like to pull data through and build something out in the Incorta environment. This is by no means in 2 hours, what your production deployment looks like, but it will give you a feel of how the platform operates. And as we mentioned, there's an email that came out yesterday or today, depending on when I got your sign up information. And I sent you a link out to the Incorta environment. And in there will be, when you go out to the environment here, it should take you over to a screen that looks like this. And so just quickly, while I'm doing the introduction, and I'm only going to do one more slide, and then we're going to spend most of the time inside of this interface. I would like you to make sure that you, got that email. I know a few folks have reached out to me where they had necessarily run into an issue, but where, I think I had a special character had gotten thrown into one email, or maybe I missed, but I believe I think I got everybody. And then you will have an email from me with your credentials. It will have your credentials, your username and password. Now, your username and password are going to be exactly the same. And the really clever technique I use is I use the first letter of your first name and then your full last name, or at least as I could discern from your email addresses, to assign those user IDs. So mine would be M. Nader, and your password will be exactly the same as your username. I do have a few additional usernames set up if we need to throw a few people in at the last moment here, but for the most part, I think we'll be in a good place. Now, in respect to what we're going to walk through, so we're going to walk through those 4 steps, but really what we're going to be playing with today is the Incorta platform as a whole. And Randy and I sort of tiptoed around the architecture yesterday. And today I want to get into it in a little more detail, and then we're going to start right into really pulling this data through and working with it. Now, Incorta is a Java-based platform built from the ground up in Java. And there are a few primary services with that from a topology perspective, and happy to get into very granular detail, but I'll try to do a high-level pass here. And that's really going to be the loader service and analytics service. And as we walk through the demonstration today, and in fact, I'll tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to get myself out of presentation mode here. We're going to look at just the slide only, because I will go back and forth as we do the demonstration. And I'll show you exactly where we're playing in the overall environment. Now, as you look through this architecture, you're going to see some things maybe that are familiar to you, and maybe not, depending on specifically what area of the organization you come from. You may see things like Spark, and Incorta does have Spark embedded in the platform, and it is optional to use, and a lot of our clients use it for the advanced data cleansing, machine learning capabilities, a lot of neat things we can do with it. There's nothing today, unless you ask me a specific question that relates to Spark processing, that we're going to do that has anything to do with Spark. Everything today is really going to be predicated on this direct data map concept. You see it in the lower portion of that first box. The direct data map is really Incorta's IP. It is what we built and added into the overall environment that allows us to process data in the way in which we do. And it allows us to work with what would otherwise be data that you may conceive as too complex to do traditional analytics, at least without some level of post-processing. But we're going to be able to do it at Incorta because of that data map. And so I'll keep coming back to it. And it's in a couple of places on the architecture. It's hard to, this is a conceptual architecture, but the data map is the most important thing. Compressed columnar or Parquet format, that's Apache, that's open source. But the data map is our IP. So I will walk through this data acquisition. We'll all walk through this all the way through the presentation and the creation of a dashboard in Incorta. Now, that does not mean to presume, to pick up on one of the questions yesterday, that you're going to use Incorta instead of something like a Cognos. You're not going to need to do that. You can leverage Cognos to come into Incorta. That's just fine. But what we're going to do here is show you we're going to use the built-in Incorta UI as the example for the interface today for the hands-on portion as we walk through it. And the last piece on the front end here, Incorta does have a SQL interface and a set of APIs. And so it allows other platforms like Cognos to come in and query data from Incorta as if we are a standard relational source. But internally, we are NoSQL based. And we'll get into more of this as we walk through the process. The only other thing I'll say is, as we start up here, if you have questions, and I'm not sure how you planned it on the other sessions, go ahead and put questions in the chat. If you are unmuted, I'm more than happy to have you interrupt me and just throw a question out there. We'll get through everything I want to get through over the next couple of hours, but I want to make sure that ultimately we're getting your questions answered and you're seeing what you need to see so you understand what Incorta does and that it makes sense. So don't hesitate at all to ask a question. We've got a number of folks on the line that are also helping monitor those in case I get, I keep going through and I don't pause for a moment. So by all means, especially the folks monitoring, interrupt me. You're not going to at all offend me in that regard. So if everybody would please, I'm going to have you follow along with me today, do a lot of this. And I want to make sure everybody can get to that URL. I tried to send to those folks that had signed up last week. I'll make sure, I think a couple days ago, you got an email from me. But go ahead and click on that initial training URL. And it is in, if you don't have the email, I will put I'll put that slide back up for just a moment so you can see it. So there is our training URL right here, please. So if you would just go ahead and make sure you can click on there. And then Incorta is a multi-tenant environment. Now we will deploy cloud or premises based. Today I'm working one of our cloud instances, but we have clients that are spread between their own premises based deployment on commodity based hardware, or I've got clients in the Oracle Cloud, Azure, AWS, Google. So you've got options in respect to deployment. The tenant we are going to be using, so the first dialog or first portion of the dialog box is Bacon. So if you would just type Bacon into that tenant box, your username into the username box, and your password and username should be exactly the same into the password box. If you need to see your password, you can clear text it with the eyeball there, and then just go ahead and sign in. And I'm going to pause for just a second here. I'm going to click sign in. And it should take you out to the content UI by default. And I'll explain this momentarily. And I'm going to have a few additional things showing up than you all do. When you all log in, you're going to see dashboards demo folder. You may see a couple of other things sitting out here, but it will, I've got a couple of extra reports that I've added for myself that we can share with you in a minute, and you can see how we share objects out. So I'm going to pause for just a second, make sure that everybody is logged in, and it takes you to the content pane now. The content pane may, and I'm going to go ahead and change it to our card view here, upper right, may look like this as opposed to the list I had started on. In fact, my gut is this is probably what your default is initially. And again, if for any reason you can't get in, you're having any issues, please throw a question or let us know inside of the webcast interface, and we'll respond to it. All right, so what we are going to do is start with pulling data in. So not radically different than you see here on the on our slide. And that right now, when I first log in, the UI takes me to the content pane, and this is where most users live. Most users will see content in Scheduler, and they can consume content here. Now that, again, that's assuming that you'd be using the Incorta UI, which is not a requirement, but that we're going to use it for training today. And in here, you can have folders, you're going to have a series of dashboards or reports. And this is going to be very similar to what you've seen from well, pretty much an analytics environment. You're going to have tables and pivot tables and hierarchies and graphical capabilities. We'll have multiple tabs in here if we want to use them. And we'll build out a dashboard in a little bit on the data that we bring into the environment. But moving left to right in the UI, you will see business schema, you're going to see schema, you're going to see data, you're going to see, or may not see security, depending on, I'd have to recall exactly how I set up your group.
Like we have one user who's stating that they only see content and scheduler on the menu.
They only see content and schedule right this second? Okay, well, let me fix that. I appreciate it. So to do that, let me just add in. Yep, so that's on my fault. So I'll just fix that right this moment. I'm going to make you all a schema manager. In fact, I'm going to make you all in this particular case. Let's make you user managers as well. So Incorta security is both record-based from a data perspective and as well as role-based inside of the UI. It also has a level of object-based security. So all I did there was just grant you the permission to see these other tabs. So I just added it into your bacon group. So my apologies for this. If you go to the upper right corner for me here, click on that little person in the upper right corner, just click sign out. It'll take you to this screen right here. Click go to sign in form. And let's just log back in, and you should then have everything across the top. And if you could, can somebody just verify for me that you do indeed see that all of the tabs now, or at least through data. Security I'm less concerned about today.
Yes, we're getting positive responses now.
Perfect, great. All right. And I don't see the, let's see, attendees. So yeah, just let me know, because I didn't see anything come through on the question side. All right, so what we're going to do on the Incorta side now is we're going to acquire data, and left to right in the UI, right to left in the UI, but we're going to go the other direction from the slide. So go ahead and click down on the data tab for me. Now, just like any other platform at this point, you've got to create a connection out to a given data source. So I have a few that we've already created, and I'm going to create the connection. Given that we've probably got 75 to 100 people working together here, I'm not going to have us load the same data set 75 times, but I'm going to show you how I load it, and I'm going to load it for you, and I'm going to make sure you have access to it, and then I'm going to show you how I share it with users and how you could share those data sets with users as well. But all of these are based on a connector architecture. And these are JDBC connectors out to the various data sources, or even APIs like Salesforce is an example of an API we've wrapped in Java to provide a level of connectivity into. And I have a series that I have created, and some of these I've shared with you and some of these I may not have. So I've created one out to Snowflake using our custom connector. I've got one out to an Amazon S3 bucket from more of a data lake perspective. The one we will use for training today, we're going to use this point of sale data source. And this is a MySQL database. It's very similar to the one that Randy showed yesterday. It is an online bike store. It's bikes, accessories, clothing, things of that nature. But it's a nice data set to work with because it's really more transactional in nature and will allow us to talk about how we process and work with data in Incorta. And then we have data files as well. And so I've got a whole series of data files sitting in here. And you may or may not have access. Let me just double check. Well, let me share a data file with you. So I'm going to share a data file with the Bacon user group right now. And so if you were to click on, off and on the local data files, you all should see at this point, because I just shared it with your group, a data file that says weather 2010 to 2014. Now that's, in this case, that's weather by zip code globally for 5 years, 2010 to 2014 inclusive. And we're going to use that as a secondary data source to tie into our point of sale data. I'm going to load both of those. I want to set up the relationship between the two data sets. And then I will make sure you have the ability to work with the data structure that's created inside of Incorta. But what I just did there, the action of going in and just simply sharing, oh, wrong file there, sharing an object, whether it is a data connection, whether it is a dashboard, whether it is a schema or data set when it's all said and done, that's the same process. And so when you've got groups of users, you can share to an individual user, or, and I've got, I know, lots of individual users in here, or I can share out to a group. To make my life easy, sharing out to groups. And when I share, one more thing to point out there, I can determine what actions you can take. Can you share it? I know I've given you view access to this, but can you reshare it? Well, it's a different permission. Can I have you edit it so you could delete it or change my properties on it? Yet a different permission. So right now I'm going to leave that to view capability. So think of those files is no different really than one of these connections. These connections represent the possibility of going out and pulling data in. It is not I have not pulled data in yet. Same thing in that data file. That weather file is data sitting in a file system I've written. Could be S3, right now it's in a file system on my Incorta machine. And that I can use that for analysis if I choose to. But I haven't read all of that in yet. We're gonna do those, and you'll watch me do that with you. Now, the way I set this particular connection up here, just click new in the upper right corner, and that's gonna be a recurring theme for us here. And we just add a data source. And when I add a data source in, I just choose the ones I want to work with. Now, one question may have come across, and I think it just did on one of my other screens, is that I had multiple data files and you only saw one. You only saw one because I shared one data file with you. I'm an administrator on this machine, and I intentionally only shared one thing, so I wanted you to see the process of sharing and how the interface changed for you. And that's really the only one we're going to work with on a file base today. So when I go to create a connection out to a source, you pick the data source you want to work with. Now, I chose MySQL earlier when I set that point of sale one up, and it's just a matter of choosing it, give it a pretty name, put your username, password, fill out the connection UI. And there are a whole host of connection capabilities that Incorta has, from more traditional databases to applications like an Essbase or Salesforce or Zora or Splunk, file systems, query services, even data lakes and custom capabilities. That's where I set that Snowflake connection up earlier. And I'm just going to test this one. So this one is already filled out for me here. I'm just going to test this one to make sure it works, because I'm going to load data from that for us. So that's up and running. Now, once a connection is created, and that's really back on our slide here, the connectors area. We're just starting to work in Incorta. What we're going to do now is we're going to create a schema. We're going to create a house for it. That's really the way I like to talk about it. This is, think of this like a completely configurable home. And what I mean by that is, if you've ever had a house built or well, just thinking about having a house built, I mean, you're going to have that builder when you buy a house, you build it or buy it based on the needs in your life. So if I've got two kids and I want a guest bedroom, and my wife and I want our own bedroom, okay, I need a 4-bedroom house and I want X number of bathrooms, and you configure that based on your life. But as circumstances in your life change, you may need one or more, or two or more or less bedrooms and the amount of space. Very difficult to do in a house, very expensive, and very difficult and very expensive to do when you consider sort of a traditional workflow in UI. If I preconceive those questions, if I start building my house for you, for my analyses, and You asked for 3 bedrooms and later you asked me for 4, I can do it, but there's cost to it. With Incorta, I'm gonna replicate this data in, and we're gonna be able to quickly reconfigure the home, reconfigure the nature of the questions we wanna ask. And that becomes really a hardcore business value. That's enabled through that direct data mapping technology. But really what the outcome is I can consider those unanticipated questions. And given that I have the data and I've got the data in full fidelity, more on that in a moment, I can reconfigure how I want to look at it. And I can ask that question that I hadn't thought about yesterday. Now to do that, I'm going to go to the Schema tab. Now, you're going to see a few schema in here that I shared with you, and I've got a few extra ones. Now, the way I built this is I quite simply just said create schema. And now I'm going to do this alone. So I just want you to watch what's happening. Just because we have 75 people in and I've got a small MySQL database in the back end, I'm not going to have us load 75 versions of the same data. But I do want you to see how I did it. So I'm not going to skip any steps. And then once I've got this schema created, I'm going to share it with you, and then I'll have you click into it and view it, and we can look at it and see how it starts. And then we'll all work together on the enrichment and a few other things, and of course building out some things inside of the Incorta UI. So the first thing I'm doing here is to create. It's just okay. I'm going to create a schema, and I'm going to call this one Bacon, and I'm going to call it Bacon. I'll just call it Bacon today. And I'll use the wizard in a moment, but I always like to highlight the fact that data is just data to Incorta. I do not care whether it comes from an S3 bucket or a Kafka stream or a relational database or a series of files or a combination thereof. With Incorta, as I pull the data in, and when it lands in the environment, all data is fair game to join to each other. Nothing is, oh, that came from this source, so I can't have it talk to that one. No, data is just data. When it lands, it's persisted, and we'll talk about how that's persisted. So I could, in a given house, in a given schema, start combining data from, let's say, your data lake as well as your Oracle EBS or JD Edwards or PeopleSoft or PIC SQL database with some files, or, and probably more logically speaking, I could separate those, and I'll separate them out into individual homes schema. That really is more of a management construct. So what I want to start with right now is I'm going to click on the Schema Wizard, and I'm going to bring the data in for us that we're going to use. And I'm going to go back to that connection I created in the Data tab. And we're going to go to that point of sale data. And based on the user and the connection there, that user can see these particular tables. We're going to start with a fairly standard relational set. Now, to expedite things, I'm just going to grab all of these tables for us today. Now, what we're doing right now is we're doing a schema detection. I'm not loading any data yet. I'm going to go through, Incorta goes through, it says, okay, here's the source name, it's zip code, and here's the type it is in the source. And in Incorta, when it lands, we're going to call it zip code, but you can change that now or you can change it later. You change the type, it can even change the function inside of the platform. Now, I'll show you a couple of things here in a minute, but it bears just a quick diversion. That what I'm doing right now is really more an Incorta administrative or I guess data catalog owner type activity. I would not expect your power users or every user to come in and go, hey, I got to pull through and I got to build this. No, what I'm going to do is when I deploy Incorta, I'm going to point it to the data systems that you want to go after. So I'm just going to use some that I have worked with. I actually worked with PM Square on recently. I've got a client down, we have a mutual client together down in Houston where we are doing data coming out of JD Edwards from their GL. We've got data coming from their consolidation system. It's Hyperion Financial Management, but it could be OneStream or Blackline or Anaplan or any number of other platforms that do that. We've got data coming from their planning, their forecasting environment, and frankly, some files, as well as a master data system And that's all being pulled together in Incorta. But we're just pointing to and pulling that data in, and then they are helping enrich that data for the user community, but it's there in its fidelity. And so we're sort of in that beginning part where, hey, I am right now just connecting in and I'm going to pull data. So if you are more of an end user or a power user, this is not going to be your day-to-day life. This is going to be, I'm going to hand you access to Salesforce. I'm going to hand you access to the data that's sitting in your GL. And I'm going to make it easy for you to do it. We're going to do it pretty quickly. And then if you're missing something, you want an extra column. So I chose not to bring in zip code. And you're like, Mike, I really needed zip code. Okay. I can bring it in, or I can not, or I can bring it in and show it to you or not. So we can very quickly adapt to that. Now, for those of you who are more data administrators, all I'm going to do on a replicate is this. I'm going to replicate really synonymous with issuing a select star. Now, it's not, it's going to enumerate the columns, but the point here is I'm not going to burden the underlying source system with a hardcore query or a lot of processing to do. And in fact, I have had clients track the spike on the data source when we did this replication. And the last time I had that done, they said they saw an 8% spike over where it was at baseline. But they have queries that spike at 16 to 20% or more. And so the replications, actually, a lot of this is going to dump from buffer. It's databases, transactional databases are made to do this. This is simple for them. And it's just going to replicate the data in that table. I'm not asking it to process across complex relationships. That's what Incorta does. Now, this last checkbox, this is going to, if there are join relationships, and Randy was talking to this yesterday, and Incorta's going to guess it does. It's going to, if they're, look, if I got key foreign keys and joins in there, I'm going to pull them in. If they're not there, we can add them. We'll augment them. And I'm going to do one of those for you as we look at this other data set. When I click update schema here, just like Randy showed yesterday, we're in our list here, but we're still right here in the schema detection phase. But what we do have is now a detected data set, and we'll load it momentarily, that is going to allow us to do analysis across this structure. And what I do like about this, even though it is a demo, what I do like about it from an analysis perspective is it's not normally conducive in a shape, and I'll explain, that is conducive to normal analytics. And what I mean by that. So, you know, we'll pick on Randy a little bit. Let's make Randy our product manager today for our online bike store. And Randy wants to do something, he wants to look at, let's say, product reviews. So Randy wants to understand his product reviews, and he wants to understand his product reviews by state here. Very logical business question. So for the data, when you ask that question of the data, it goes from state to address to sales order header to sales order detail. It's 4, it goes to product, it's 5, and then finally it goes to your product review. There's 6. So simple question, but internally, if you go to your GL as an example, or your point of sale system, you got to go across 6 different locations in there. And that's where you start getting into a lot of problems historically, because every time I cross one of those tables, I get an exponential slowdown in performance in the request. And that's because, and that's not a SQL Server or DB2 or Oracle, that's just the nature of the way transactional databases handle memory. And if you're not a database person, think of it like Excel. If I've got an Excel formula and I write in one worksheet and I reference 6 other workbooks on my network in that formula, and you can do that, Excel will let you do it. When you hit F9, because AutoCalc won't be on, when you hit F9 to calculate that formula, what'll happen is it'll, on your laptop, go out and connect out to that other workbook remote and open it up into memory on your laptop and bring some of the data in and start tracking the permutations, and then it'll do it again and again and again. And that combination gets bigger and bigger and bigger exponentially, uses more memory, slows it down more and more. Same concept on your database side. That is at our core what Incorta resolved. And that not only do I not suffer a slowdown here, I use that to help optimize. And in fact, for us to use round numbers, 1 billion rows are out of one table is it's just as fast to do the same billion rows out of 6. And in fact, probably more efficient. So I'm going to load up some data here, talk about the architecture for just a moment longer, and then I'm going to share this with you and have you open it up and we're going to look through a few things together. And then we're going to start building things together. So I'm going to go ahead and close that out. And I'm just going to run a load, and I'm going to run a full load right now. And so what's happening under the covers right now is I've gone out and in a multi-threaded fashion, asked each of those 32 tables in this case to replicate their data inside to Incorta. So what we're doing, it's a two-phase load process. Very first thing we do is we extract the data and we persist it in compressed columnar format. That may be meaningful for some people, may not. Don't get too hung up on that. It's an efficiency that we use, and it allows us to do very high levels of compression, which we then tack on some additional compression to. But what we have is, I have 32 tables in this source right here. I have 32, once this is done, I'm gonna have 32 compressed tables in Incorta, row for row, column for column. And we will never decompress them during the entire analysis process. When we're playing today, we're going to be playing everything with compressed data sets. But the second state or phase of our load process, and this is really gets really cool. We build out this data map. We push everything through our direct data map and into a memory-based analytics engine. Memory-based, not memory-bound, because we'll hot swap on and off. But what this data map allows us to do is really, really unique. And think of it, and I think a good way to at least conceptualize it at the surface is to think of it comparative to how Google maps things out on the internet. I can go right now to Google and I can put in seemingly any set of phrases and it'll come back in seconds with an answer and a series of matches to what it does in the, what it's crawled out in the environment of the web. Now, Google's constantly crawling, constantly indexing, constantly understanding what's sitting there. And I won't presume to understand their algorithm exactly how they do it. What Incorta does on that data map is it not only understands the relationships table to table, in this example, but really down to the cell by cell level. So any question that can conceivably ask from one cell to another in that data set, or frankly, anything else that's joined to it, Incorta will map. So it has an understanding of it. So when a question's asked, like Randy's question, we were given it a moment ago about the reviews by state, we already know how to get to the answer, so we just answer it right away. I don't have to think about how to get there and rewrite and optimize and run that process and chunk through memory. No, it's just there. So what you're going to see here is this extracted right here. This is how long did it take me to extract, persist, and compress? Like this one took 23 seconds. The sum total, it took 1 second to create the data map for all of these. And if I have an error, by the way, this comes up from time to time, I got some rejections. I can download that. Download the, and say, okay, hey, let's go ahead and open this up with Excel. So this is more, again, more of your data, your data steward. But I want to say, okay, this is why this is the error column. This is what it was expecting. This is what it got. Maybe it was blank, maybe it's something. So you can go through and understand and look if something rejected, right, rejected. But really, and I'm not going to dig into the 35 rows there today. But what we have now is in about 45 seconds, we took somewhere in the neighborhood, just shy of 25 million rows. We compressed it to about 700 megs of space, and it is now row for row, column for column sitting there. It's mapped, it's ready to be used. Now it's still in a form that if you're somebody that generally tends to work with curated data structures, I mean, it's still sitting here. If you were to explore data on this, we're still going to see all these tables. And in fact, let me show you these. So let me share this with this so you have that option. So I'm going to go ahead and share this schema out. The schema I just loaded called bacon. I'm just going to share this out, share it with our bacon group. I'm going to give you view access to it. I'll tell you what, I'm going to throw caution to the wind. I'm going to give you edit access to it. Don't change anything on me. I can reload it in 40 seconds, but I want to make sure you can click everywhere you want to. So if you would, just for a second on your side, can you please click on data and just click back to schema for me? So you now should see this bacon schema. And if you just click on the name bacon, you're going to get a list in here of all the tables. And if you click on diagram, you should get a diagram out there. So let me know if anybody has any issue doing that. I'm checking for questions, and I know I've got Tammy Brastad, a few folks monitoring for me as well. So we'll make sure if any questions pop up, we're right there for you. So we have the data sitting here in this format now. Now, we're going to play in here for just a minute. I'm a big fan of the diagram. It's how I tend to think about data. I don't like the list. If I click on any table, like just click on sales order header here in the middle, what you're going to see is you're going to get anything that it's related to. You'll get some idea on the number of rows, how much data is sitting there, if there's a key column that we found, what have you. Talk performance optimize later if there's time. Now, if you double click on any table here, that table is going to pop open in the UI. And you will see, and you have the ability to do formula, and we can do all kinds of neat things in here, which in a 2-hour training will be hard to get into. But if and don't do any of this, just watch. But if I wanted to change labels or change names or even change data types, I could do that right here, right now. There's a different place to do it, and it's better for the users. We'll do that together. And actually, I'm going to have you do that. But for right now, if you came in here with me, please, in the upper right corner, again, please click cancel. Click cancel in the upper right corner. It's just going to bring you back to the list. And then if you would, click schema at the top of the screen. Now you'll have some, again, I'm going to have a few extra schemas sitting in here. So another schema, and I'm going to connect some data together, and then we're going to start building some things together. I mentioned that weather data earlier. So I have already loaded that, but it's in its own schema. It took me 40 seconds to load it. It's 74 million rows, compresses to just a little over a gig of space. It's just a flat file. It's got 19 columns, and I actually calculated max temperature, just said, hey, take the temperature and make it a long. Just did a data type conversion. So I calculated that in Incorta. I'm going to use that as a metric, and I want to tie the weather data together with point of sale. So if I go into my bacon schema here, and I've got my diagram, or I've got my information in, I'm going to join up and tie those two data sets together. Now, I know exactly where to go to do this because I've played with this data for a couple of years at this point. I'll show you an example of what you could do if you didn't know, and how you could start doing some exploration of that data really, really quickly. But I'm going to, right this second, I'm going to join up the schema for us. So I'm going to go to the sales order header, and on when something was ordered, I want it to relate to the weather on when the weather occurred, but also where something was ordered and where the weather occurred. I mean, it's overcast and colder in Chicagoland today, and I imagine if you're coming to us from somewhere out in California, Southern California, or Florida, or I don't know, even Minneapolis. I don't know what the weather is today, but maybe a little different than it is here. So I'm going to need both perspectives. And the reason this only had one column and this only had 4 is because it's doing a type match between the two. Now, when I click done, you'll notice it's saying direct data mapping in progress. So what that's doing now is it's going back to the data map that it originally created, and it augmented it, updated it with new knowledge. Because now I have a 33rd table involved here. And if I click on diagram again, well, now I've got that weather table, and it's hard to see, so I'm going to zoom in. Whoops, let's do this. It's in this little gray box. And that's just an iconography to state that, hey, that's in a different house, but I've now related it. And this particular house only happens to have one file in it, that schema. But if it had 32, joining to one allows me to start traversing the relationships to everything else over there. Simple example, I'm just doing the one. But as far as Incorta is concerned right now, this is one data set. And if everybody is following along with me, and you're inside the schema, so if you're not, click on the schema tab up top, please. Click on the bacon schema, not the one with the uppercase A, sorry about that. Click on this bacon schema here. Make sure this is the one I put the weather into, pretty confident that it is. It is, okay. And then up in the upper right corner here, I'd like you to click Explore Data. Now this is taking us from an architecture perspective out to the Incorta visualization UI for a moment. And my intention here is just to show you, to talk a little bit about that data discovery and just letting you dip your toe in the water. But we're going to make this a much simpler thing to use in just a moment. Because what you have here is you've got a big list on the left. Now let's make this UI at least a little simpler to start with. So right to the right of the search box here, you see these 3 dots. I want you to click on those 3 dots. And I want you to select collapse to table level. That's just going to give you a list of tables that are in here. Now you'll notice it's got 2 schema, 2 houses. This is not, now I repeat, this is not how I would tell you to deploy it to your standard user community. I don't know any user that's trying to do a product profitability report that needs to understand the security rules inside of the underlying data structures. Now maybe, but we'll make it so that everybody doesn't have to see all that in a moment. But I just wanted to give you an idea of how this operates and how you can start. If you didn't know where to do that join as an example, I could start playing with the data here a little bit. Now follow along with me, because I know this data set, and I'm going to have us build something really fast, and then I'm going to have us simplify, and then we'll start adding some calculations and things and to make it a little more fun. One of the things that you're going to start seeing me do, and I'm going to encourage you to do when you work with Incorta, is to start searching. A byproduct of our data map is a search capability. And when you have the ability to come in here and start searching through the available columns. And in fact, if you're an end user, you can search through the data elements themselves. We will do that before we're done today. And we're going to build on an insight. If you click on this insight drop down in the upper right, or in that list there, what you're going to see is you have a fairly standard cast of characters, capabilities in here, building out a series of both tabular and graphical analyses. So for now, let's do this. Click on line for me, click on line chart. And depending on the insight, we call our visualizations insights. Depending on the insight you select, you're going to get different options here. So you got to have a grouping dimension, a color dimension, and a measure dimension in this particular case. And then we can start filtering, and we'll play with those a little later. Click back in the search box right there for me. And in the search box, I want you to type line total, no spaces. Now, I know this data because I played with it for a long time. And I know that line total on my sales order detail, that's my revenue. That's a number. If I want to preview it, I can click on that little I. I can even say, okay, hey, that's a double, it's a measure. Here's some sample data. You can do it with anything. I want you to just drag and drop that and drop it in the measure shelf for me. And when you do that, because you have it selected, you're going to get a whole series of options to format it, and everything will pop up right here. You can close that by clicking the X. You can turn it back on by clicking on the pill again. And we'll play with some of those options a little later as we go along today. Well, what I want to do now is I want you to clear out the search box. And I want you to type in there, I want you to type in their state, or no, I'm not state. No, I want you to type in their category, the word category. And you're going to see a number of things that have that in it. But at the bottom of the list, in the product category table, you get category name. Take that category name for me, if you would, please, and drag that and drop it in the coloring dimension. That's not going to do anything yet. We're going to add one more thing, and then we'll have something interesting on the screen. So you've taken category over there, and you have fewer options because of where it's sitting, but it's still there. You have options. Go ahead and please click the X and clear the search box for me. I'm going to do one more search. Type the word temp, or call it a pseudo word here. And you're going to see max temp. And that's going to come out of that other data set that we joined into this. I joined into it for us. Just take that, drag and drop it on the grouping dimension. And then click on that X. So what we're seeing here right now is, well, it's a line chart. And it's just showing you based on the maximum temperature, your sales for a given, a breakdown by zip code, it's aggregating across a number of things. But we're going across a 25 million record data set and across a 75 million record data set together. Now, the neat thing is not the fact that it's a line chart. The neat thing here is that and you don't need to do this, just watch for a second. So you don't need to follow along here. But I am going to click on this. I want you to see under the covers what's happening. Incorta is going across 6 tables, including across a composite key join, and it's doing a dynamic aggregation and bringing you back that information. And the neat thing is that this is what's happening in the background without the necessity to simplify. So we talk about fidelity or simplification. What we often mean is just to use round numbers. If I have 100 tables, whether they're from one source or multiple, and let's say that has 1 billion rows of data in it, or 10 billion, what Incorta is not going to ask you to do is take that 100 tables, and that 10 billion rows of data, and create 2 star schema or snowflake or whatever model you want with 10 dimensions each and a couple of fact tables to use it. You can just use it. That doesn't mean we don't simplify. Doesn't mean we don't enrich. Calculation is by its very nature a modeling activity, but those are what you do analysis for. You're going to calculate your average sales or cost or profit. We'll do a couple of those momentarily. But what Incorta is doing under the covers is scaling across that structure. And that's where when a user, we're talking about, the process, dramatically simplifying the process. This is the first part of that. I've got all the data from these 2 sources. It's replicated in. Now I can use it, but I don't want to make all my users have to understand and do all this. Oh, okay, line total is revenue, and I could double click and rename here, but that's not scalable to have every user do that either. So we can simplify that. And that's what we're going to do next. So if you're following along with me right now, in the upper right corner, I just want you to cancel. And when you cancel, it's going to say, hey, wait a second, you did something. Do you want to save it? Just click exit. We're not going to worry about that right this moment. It's going to pull us all the way back down to the schema. So back in our architecture, we're coming back over here for a moment. Now, what I want us to do is we're going to start simplifying this, and we'll put some calculations and things in as well. So the simplification piece comes in really our concept of we call our business schema, but this becomes our semantic layer. So go ahead and click on this tab for me, the business schema tab. And I shared out at least one with everybody. I think you have a sales revenue or one of these few that you're seeing on the screen here. I see somebody else has added one in. It's fine. So what I want you to do right now is we're going to do a new one. Now, I don't like the fact that we call this a schema. I don't like the UI name because it makes it sound more complex than it is. All we are going to start doing is grouping like columns together for analysis. I am not going to reload the data. I am not going to reshape the data. All I want to do is organize it so that a user coming in who works in the AP department doesn't necessarily need to see a bunch of information from the HR environment or the security rules tables or all of that. But it's all there. But think of this like putting a window into your house. You know, I've got 5 people in my home. My wife, my kids, myself, my niece lives with me as well. And you know, pre-pandemic, most weekends I'd have my brother over if he were in town. My nephew lives in the area. I'd have 10, 12 people in my home. And if you were standing in the backyard of my house, looking through the big windows back there, and you're looking into the living room, on a given Saturday afternoon, maybe you see, 10, 12 people. But if you walk around the kitchen window of the house, my brother and I both like to cook. So we cook together a lot when he's over. And if you're looking in the kitchen window, you probably see the 2 of us in the kitchen cooking. And if that were your only aspect into my home, you might very well make a logical assumption there's only 2 people living there. No, there was 12 in the house. But I gave you a window. Your aspect only allows you to see the 2. And that's all we're doing here. We're putting a window in. And how wide you make it is completely up to you. So I want you to click New in the upper right corner. And we're going to select Create Business Schema. And for a name, we're going to name this. We're going to name this Bacon. Now, everybody's going to have to give a unique name because internally we're going to save a reference to these things. In my architecture, we have a metadata database, and we're putting an entry in there right now. So if you would please, can you add your username into it? So I'm going to go bacon_Nader, just so we don't all run over across the top of each other. And if for any reason, I've got one built for us, so I can always provision you all to it. In fact, I already have. But I'd like you to do this with me. And we're going to just click Save. And so that added an entry into our metadata database to say, hey, look, this user is the owner of this business schema. And then in here, you're right in the middle of the screen, it's going to say Add New View. Click on that. And just, you can backspace over New View. And I'm going to name this Revenue or Sales. You can name whatever you want. No spaces in this particular one. Just put a single word or a compound. You put underscores, what have you. And then just to the left of it, you've got this blue plus. And I want you to click on that blue plus. And that's going to bring up the list of tables that we have access to. And you probably aren't going to see all of these, but what I want you to click on is Bacon and on weather. And it may, when you click on it, it'll expand it, just collapse it. Click Done. And then just to give us a little shortcut here, on the lower left, you see that collapse all button. I'd like you to click collapse all. That just makes it simpler for me to find things. Now, just like before, 32 tables here, 33rd table down here. But what we're going to do now is, okay, what do we want to do here? We have access to all this information, thousands of columns probably across at least 33 tables, or at least many, many hundreds. And if you look at something like a production Oracle EBS, you have 58,000 tables and 138 subject areas. It's a lot. So what do we want to work with here? Let's start with bringing our revenue in, or just pulling that over. So I want you in this search box, just like we did a moment ago, to type line total. And it's going to find that on the sales order detail now. And we're in the process of what you saw on the analyzer UI a moment ago is Incorta's new interface. And we're in the process of pushing that iconography and all down across the entire, each portion of the UI. So this is why this looks a little different. If you click the eyeball, you can do a preview here just like we did before. What I want you to do is just in this gray box right here, not below it in the white space, but in the gray box, just drag line total in and drop it. And you're going to have a name and you're going to have a label. And for the label, I'd like you to type revenue, because that's how we want the users to see it. Let's have them see it as revenue, not as line total. Once that's done, I'd like you to come up here and search again. Clear the search. Type category. Then you're going to find on the product category table, it's the second one's going to show up. You got category name. I want you to grab that and just drag it over and drop it. And by the way, the order in which these get dropped is the order the users will see them. For now, let's not worry about reordering things. We'll just leave it, but you can organize it. In fact, if you wanted to really get into it, I can put folders in and I can do all kinds of things. But today we're going to keep it simple because I really want to spend a good chunk of our last hour together going through and building out some analyses on the front end, just to let you play a little, and then we'll start talking about some of this other really neat things you can do here. So I've got my line total, I've got my category. If you see down here where it says subcategory name on the product subcategory table, let's drag that in for me as well. And then I want you to clear your search box. We're going to do a few searches for the next couple of minutes. Let's put everything together here. In the search box, type product name, no space. And again, it's just because I know the data set very well. So here are our product names that we're going to work with from our bike store. I just want you to drag that in, and I want you to drop it under subcategory. But if you drop it someplace, don't worry about it today. Just make sure it gets in there. And then, so I just got a question on my other screen here. One question come up, is there a way to group? Don't do this, just watch for a moment if you would, okay? I can absolutely say, all right, you know what I wanna do is I can, think of a view as a folder, but then there's the concept of foldering in Incorta where I could say, okay, just to make it simple, I could say dimensions. And this is my currency dimension. Oh, I gotta create a view in there. All right, currency. And I could start dragging things in. And then when a user came in to use it, they would see a folder for dimensions, and they'd see the individual things underneath it. So yes, you can organize that in any number of ways. And if I'm doing this in more of a production deployment, that's exactly how I tend to organize things. For today, we're trying to keep it just simple, but most definitely you can structure it. And in fact, it's not altogether obvious, and we'll do this before we're done. That little formula box up there, I can drag that in and create a new formula in here as well. And we will do that. But back on our search right now. So I've got product. What I'd like you to type right this minute up here, type customer ID. No spaces, you've got customer ID. And then from the, you're going to see it in 3 places, just from the sales order header, just do me a favor, just drag it and drop it into our view. I want to bring in some customer information. Then clear the search box for me. We're going to bring a few more things in. Type order, date, no space. And there's a couple of them, but right now let's just take when we sold something. So grab the order date from sales order here and just drag that out. And there are ways inside of Incorta to grab the month, the year, the week, the day. In fact, we ship with a common date construct that allows you to do day over day, week over week. It's built in to the data sets that we provide. And it can be adjusted to match, let's say you're not a calendar fiscal, but you run a retail 44 or 454 or whichever kind of calendar you want. Generally pretty straightforward to customize that and have it to roll through for you. So I've got, what I sold, how much, what was my revenue, what I sold, my subcategory, I got my product and who I bought, when. Let's look up where. Type state in here. And there's a state province name column. And I think my data set is only North America, so I'm not gonna worry about country right now. So just grab state province name and toss it in here. Go ahead and clear the search box. And then type zip code. And you'll get the zip code information right up here off the sales order header. Just grab that. And we're gonna search for 2 more columns. And then we'll pause on the business schema for a second, but we're going to work with it, we'll play with it. So the last things I want you to search for, we're going to add 2 more metrics. Now, first one I want you to search for is temp. We're going to grab that max temperature, and that's sitting over here on in that other data set. Just drag it. Now, this is a habit of mine. I like to have my metrics at the top of the list, but it doesn't matter, frankly, for you all today. Just make sure it gets in here. And the last thing I want you to do is clear temp and type order QTY. Sorry, I bumped mute there. So, and I just want you to grab order quantity from this bottom option and just toss it up there as well. Now, when we're done with this, I want you must, in the upper right corner, click done. You are not done until you click done. Click done. So what I have done, what we have done, if you're following along with me, is said that, okay, this is my window. This is my 10 columns. These are my 10 columns that are sitting inside of that window. And all the rest of the data is there. We're going to use this to build for a little bit. Another question came through on the multiple calendars. Yes, we can absolutely leverage data across multiple calendars. And longer conversations, it depends on, we can do it, and it can do it in a myriad of ways. So we'd have to talk through the requirements specifically on, do I want to have one column that is a fiscal calendar, and then the calendar, the fiscal calendar in column A, and column B on the same report is your particular, or is a standard Gregorian? Yes, you could do that. We could have them have a given insight or set of insights change based on different calendars. So longer conversation, but most definitely doable. What I want you to do right now, if everybody's clicked done, now you'll see that explore data button again. Let's go ahead and click explore data for me. What you're going to see now is instead of 32 tables or 33 tables and all those columns, now we're using that window. And I am seeing a series of columns that I put in there. And if I'm a user logging in, that's what I'm going to see, because this is how I'm going to tell you to deploy. Pull your data in, provision your users, your groups to let's call them subject areas. I haven't reloaded the data. This is just going to be this is a visual aesthetic. But if I'm logging in now from Cognos, this is what Cognos sees. This looks like a table. It looks like a flat table. It's not, but that's what it looks like. Because let's do the exact same thing we did before. Go up to your listing table here, click on that drop down, and then select line. Take your revenue, drag it to measure. Take your category, drag it to coloring. Take your temperature, max temp, and drag it to grouping. And click this X in the middle. I'll just get rid of that for you. So you're now seeing a breakdown, just as we did before. And right here, change the insight title. Just click where it says click to edit. And I'm going to call this revenue by category and temp. And in the upper right corner, if you would please, click save. Because what we've done here is we've all just created an initial dashboard. So this is my first insight on a dashboard. And I've got one tab. We'll talk tabs in the interface here in a few moments. But I want to build a few more things for us first. So in the upper right corner here, please, you'll see a plus, and it'll say add insight. Please click on that. And it's going to default us back to our listing table. So this time I want to change this up just a little bit. Select pivot table for me. So on the pivot table, and this is just a standard pivot table, we're going to go ahead and now and build a slightly different view of this data. So what I'd like you to do here, please, is take your revenue again, drag revenue to measure. This time, even throw order quantity down there. And on the columns, let's put category and subcategory. And on the rows, let's put state, province name. And this is just a pivot table. Okay. Click the X to close that little middle pane. And I'm going to name, and I don't care if you edit your insight names. I'm going to just call this one revenue and quantity by state and subcategory. Category, there we go. And I'm going to click save, and it's going to end up on the dashboard. Now, Incorta automatically throws things to the bottom on the dashboard. What I'm going to have you do in just a minute is we're going to reorganize this. Well, in fact, actually, let's reorganize this right this moment. So if you scroll down, make sure you're over your pivot table we just did. If you go over by the label, you're going to see just off to the left of the label. I know I'm always suspect on whether this comes through on the screen share or not. You've got two sets of dots, or looks like two columns of dots. That is a little handle. If you hover your mouse over that, the pointer is going to change into a little hand. If you click and drag and start holding that, it's going to start changing like you see here on the screen. And I'm just going to drop it for a second. But essentially what you're doing there is editing the layout. And if that happened for you, just don't do anything, just leave it for a second. I'm going to cancel mine. You can also edit the layout by coming up here. And I can configure settings and I can start editing. There's all kinds of things I can do besides, it's all up in that area. So on the edit layout though, you can either use the mouse to drag and drop, or frankly, I'm going to use the arrow keys on my keyboard and I'm just going to start moving this insight up and to the right. And then I'm going to change the size of it. Let's say I'm going to give my line chart 2x the space, or maybe I'll leave that at 1x and this over here at 2x the space. And then just click save. And it'll rebuild or just show you the dashboard again. So we've got 2 insights on here. We're going to build a few more. I'm not going to dwell too long on the insights because ultimately it's how we're handling the data that's unique, not the fact that we're doing pivot tables and line charts. But I need to show you this because this is important to me. And I think it's important understanding the value proposition of Incorta, more importantly. Go ahead and click the plus in the upper right corner again. Now I'm going to leave us at listing table this time. All a listing table is like a select star from Incorta. It's just you want to see what's there. And in fact, instead of grabbing an individual column, I'm going to go up to where it says revenue right here, this little table, this little view. And I'm going to drag and drop all of them on the measure shelf. It's just going to give me a list of everything that's sitting in there. Now what we can do here, in the upper right corner, I'll talk about the SQL thing in a second. In the upper right corner, you see that gear icon. Click on the gear icon for me. Now, any of our insights, or really anywhere in Incorta, you see the gear icon, this is your settings, these are your options, preferences. And in this particular insight, because it'll change based on the insights you've got, bar charts have different settings in a table like this. All I want you to do is just turn the toggle switch for total on. And that's just going to add totals at the bottom of this report. And you can click the X right here just to close that. And you'll notice that I've got 8.2 billion in revenue. I've got 20,000, just 21 million items ordered. I've got a max temp that's adding up, which I don't like, and I got a customer ID that's adding up, which I don't like that concept. So back over here on my list of pills, click on max temp. And then for aggregation, click on that drop down and let's call that an average. So instead of adding that up, can you please give me an average of those? And on customer ID, if you click on that, please, make sure you click on the arrow there, it'll open the little submenu up. For aggregation, go to distinct. When you've done with that, just click save for me in the upper right. What you're going to see here is I have 8.2 billion in revenue. I've got just about 21 million, or just rounding up, 21 million items total, not unique. 64-degree average temperature, but 19,119 distinct customer IDs. And this is, of course, crossing multiple data sets. Now, in this particular table, there are 9 million rows. The arrows at the bottom scroll through them, but don't use the arrows right now. Because what I want to just have a quick conversation. We talked fidelity. I used the word fidelity earlier. And if you hear me talk about this to clients very often, I talk about the concept of data trust and the value of understanding the root cause and why something happens. When I was implementing systems for clients, it came up all the time. The users want to understand why, not just, okay, yes, this happened, I can see it. But what's driving the pattern? You call it a drill through, a drill to detail, a master detail. What this is a fairly recurring but yet complex, historically speaking, requirement, in that I need to know where you're going to click to understand what the patterns are, because none of these numbers that we're seeing here on that line chart, or even in this pivot table of the real data, they're abstractions or aggregations of your real data. They're not the why. They're the what. And I'm going to, let's use Tammy. I know Tammy lives in Minnesota. There's nothing in the data set that says there's $467,481.36 revenue for bike racks in Minnesota, because the data are the 9 million lines. But if I want to know what makes that number up, if I click on that number, just click on it, and you're going to get given an option. Do you want to see this by all of those factors? Do you want to see just by subcategory? We're going to select all of them. Top option. That 467,000 is 937 rows of data. And these are your 10 distinct customer IDs. This is your order quantity, and this is your average temperature. And it never misses. It can't miss because I never abstracted it out. I never modeled it. I never took that 100 tables and turned it into 10 dimensions and a bunch of aggregate fact tables. I'm just working with it. And that filter state is what you've done up here. And I can remove these filters. If you click on any of them, you can click on one and you can add, change filters. You can remove one if you want to. But I can also bookmark it. If I click the bookmark, I can say, okay, let's call this one for Tammy. I can make that public, or I can come back in later. So that next time I come in, that's a filter state I want to get back to. But I'm able to get right back down to that. Now I'm going to click clear all in the upper right here. And get back down to all my rows of data sitting here. And this is where we can start having a lot of fun with the information. In that, I want to search for something, and I promise you business users do this all the time. They know what they want to look for. If you ever talk to anybody in your finance department, you may be from the finance department, I bet you could tell me right now the starting string for every revenue account. Now, all your revenue accounts start with 412 or 411 or 71. I bet you know exactly the pattern of your chart of accounts. I bet you know exactly, if you run the product group, the pattern of your SKUs and how you have that organized. And users that understand that can come in here and say they want to start searching for things. So if I want to look for helmets, let's do this. If you're on your dashboard, start typing the word helmet, H-E-L. What Incorta is doing right now is it's going down to the data element level on this dashboard and saying, okay, you've got product names that have H-E-L in it, you've got subcategories. If I just put an H in, by the way, I get state province names, I get product names, but helmets, okay, H. All right, I want helmets. Click on helmets. Now I want to look at helmets in, let's say, Washington State. Then maybe I want to look for, I don't know, let's look for, I can do the red helmet. And so all of your data is now being filtered down based on what you're searching for. And that's going to happen regardless of whether it is a line chart or a bar chart. And frankly, anywhere you click, I want to look at that. Okay, there's my breakdown at 86 degrees. Okay, there's everything I've done at 86 degrees. And if I want to reuse these, or I want to look at the data a different way, I can come in and I can say, let me show me this as a table, show me this as an aggregated table. There aren't any, I could spend an entire day working with you all and just teaching you the aspects of the front end from an analysis perspective. But that's, I could duplicate this, I could copy it and go to another tab. I can drill from tab to tab, dashboard to dashboard. I can paste that insight over here and work with it. Any number of capabilities. But I want to backtrack just a little bit and I want to move back over. I want to create a couple calculations and show you some more about how Incorta operates and talk some more on the data side, because that is the deep value proposition that Incorta is bringing to the table. So if you would here, let's go back to our business schema. Go ahead and click on the business schema tab for me. On my screen, and that's because I'm the overall admin here. I get to see all these business schema we create. I'm actually super excited. We got at least 20. I mean, some people, you all are building your own business schema. That's cool. Some may have used the one I did, but thank you for following along. So what we're going to do now is go ahead and edit yours. Now I'm going to go back into my bacon sales or bacon Nader, sorry. And I got to see the one revenue view that I created. And the three dots out here on the right, if you click on that, select edit for me. So what I want to do now is I'm going to add a calculation in here. So right up top here where it says new formula, can you drag out, I want you to just go ahead and drag that and drop new formula out into the grid, into this table. And it's going to say new formula for the name, new formula for the label. So on the name, let's name this cost. And let's give it the same label, that's fine. And then over here, we're going to leave this as a measure, but I could make it a dimension as well. Click on set formula for me. So in the formula dialog, we're going to build something out. And this looks very much similar iconography wise to the analyzer UI. So the three dots next to the search box, let's do the same thing we did before. Click on those and select collapse to table level. And we're going to go and I want to search for something, and it's not going to be there. I'm telling you right now, I'm going to search for it. I expect it to not be there. So type the word cost for me. Oh, actually, now I feel bad because it is there. I forgot that we pulled that in earlier. So you should see standard cost. And that's just coming, I have a product master that's got a bunch of costs on it. What's this product cost me? I want you to just double click that or drag it over here. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to drag it in. And I'm going to hit return just to make it easier for you all to see. And then I'm going to put a multiplication sign and I'm going to hit return again. And I'm going to clear that search box and I'm going to look for order QTY. I want to know my order quantity. I'm going to drag that out. And I'm going to save that. So that is going to derive for us in our business schema the cost of a given line. And I could go back in and do profit, but I wanted you just to see how that operates. Now, in your world, I would like everybody who's doing this with me to click done in the upper right corner. I want to show you something on my screen, but I want you to click done in the upper right corner. So I'm going to click change formula here. Again, I just want to show you this. Now, an important thing to note is Incorta has got a whole series of functions, statistical, mathematical, string-based. You can do some pretty complex things in here. And you can also have a whole series of variables that you can define your own, but we also ship with a bunch. And if you click on any of the functions in here, it'll give you a summary. And frankly, if you start typing out here, if I start typing order, I can hover over this and get that. It'll even say, okay, order QTY. I can get it so it starts finding the columns for me. For right now, I'm just going to click done. So if I come back, instead of the business schema tab here, click on content. And you should see probably just one or two dashboards, and you're going to see one with your business schema name on it because you just modified it. In my case, 5 minutes ago. Go ahead and click on that dashboard. Open it back up. And it's going to pop the information back into the screen for us here. And we're going to build another insight. So in the upper right corner, click the plus for me. Add an insight. And this particular time, click that drop down over there. And I want you to scroll all the way to the bottom of the list. And we're going to select KPI. Now, this is just a single field indicator, key performance indicator. But what you'll see up here for our revenue, or excuse me, you notice cost is now showing up because we just added that to our window. I want you to drag revenue in. I want you to drag order quantity in. I want you to drag cost in. And I want you to drag customer ID in. Now we can change the labels of any of these if we want to, but no need to do it today. I'm clicking on revenue. You'll notice I can format this right here. If I click on that arrow on the pill, so let's say we'll make this dollar rounded. And actually, let's make it dollar rounded. There we go. My order quantity. Now, if I click on that one, let's say I just make this rounded. I don't need the fractional. My cost, make that dollar rounded. My customer ID. Make that rounded, but also make that a distinct count. So I'm just doing a series of KPIs here, but my formula is showing up and it's now deriving that based on that change we made. Click Save. And just like before, this is at the bottom of the screen. And I'm going to grab it. And this time I'm just going to use the mouse to drag it up and let it scroll. And I'm going to drop it at the top of the screen here. Click Save. So now I've got a series of KPIs at the top of the dashboard. And just like anything else on this, if I want to see what Arizona's doing, I click on it. I'm going to get my KPIs are going to be filtered down as well. 31,000 in revenue, 141 customers, 141 customer IDs, 31,000. I must have done something wrong here or over here, but there is my my breakdown there. I'm gonna clear that back out. So everything functions in an interchangeable way. Now, some neat things that you can do on the UI here, and then we're going to bounce back over to the data in just a minute. If you see the 4 arrows going different directions here, if you can click on that, on any of the insights, you can expand a given insight to full screen and you can page through it. You can even play through it automatically like a set of slides. One of the neat things people ask a lot when working with Incorta is they see something like this where, okay, obviously my bikes are skewing the entire chart. And I could change the chart to logarithmic to make it look good. But if I want to turn off an entire data series, just go down to the legend and click on bikes. I'm turning it off. I can turn off clothing or components or turn them all back on just by clicking on any of them. So the intent here is a fully interactive, searchable data experience, but without the necessity of having to do all of that previous modeling. Now I'm going to go back over. I don't see, I'm looking over, make sure any questions. I'm going to go back over to I'm going to go and click the X over here in the upper right. I'm going to click back down onto the schema part, the data area, and talk a little bit about other options we have in here. So thus far, we've been working with, the training. We'll work with a pretty simple data set. 32 tables plus our weather data. That formula we just did as an example on cost. I did that formula. I had us do that formula on the business schema. Probably not where I would do that at a deployment. I would probably come back in and say, okay, you know something? I want to take that same cost formula. and I'm going to add that down here into the table. So as the data ingests, it calculates it for me automatically. I don't need to have it calculated every time a user queries. And I can do it the exact same way. Standard cost times the order quantity. And then I can refer to this inside of the business schema. So you have options of as to where you build things and how you do it. And when I click done here, it'll calculate it for me. It'll go through every line, in this case, 9 million of them on this table, calculate it. But other neat things we can do in here, and it becomes a very, very powerful. Again, this is more of your data steward type of activity. But you'll notice this plus right here. I created this table through a SQL query. And I'm going to just cheat really quick and steal it. I can actually create tables and say, you know something, I want to create that as a combination of that, and I'm just going to do something we'll use. Yeah, I'll use this one right here, a CSV like this. And then I can come through and manage the output and say, okay, are these the same thing? Are they not the same thing? Well, they're not the same thing, or this doesn't exist. How do I want to handle it? And so now this in Incorta becomes the combination of the two. And can start merging data together. Or I could even have multiple SQL queries here. So I'm actually going to get rid of this one because I just get rid of that one. Click done because I'm calculating my cost. That's what it's doing. It updates the data map, calculates the cost, and pulls that data in. The other thing I like to talk through when we come into this environment is just how we start doing a level of management of these data loads. So if I click the gear, again, common theme, if you see a gear, it's going to be where your options are. And the options that you're going to see inside of Incorta, of course, put a description on, but I can start changing load orders in these tables. Right now, as far as Incorta is concerned, everything loads at the same time. But if you know I need to load this and then I want to load this other table second, I can start grouping these and save the order in which things load. I can in here also start generating curated data structures. So right now I've got the data sitting in this Bacon schema. If I want to add another table, frankly, I could add another table in Incorta just simply by telling Incorta to look at itself and say, all right, I want to take the data, but maybe I want to have another subset of it that the users would give me a set of rules that they want to apply and that they don't want to see certain things. So let me collapse this down. And I only want to see the data as it relates to, oh, where's my detail table here? There we go. Take all of that. Try that one more time. There we go. Take all of this information. And maybe I only want to see this. Oh, that would be my mistake. Sorry about that. How about there? There's all my information. Sorry about that. And I only want to see that where, well, my carrier tracking number isn't empty, isn't null. Now I've got another data structure sitting in there that I can give out to users and leverage based on business rules or heuristics that they apply or that they've given me. So all the data is in the system, but depending on what you want to do with it, say, hey, look, I don't want to see anything where the carrier tracking is null because it's not meaningful to me, or where I don't have an order quantity, or I don't have a cost. I'm not a believer in bad data, by the way. So I'm intentionally using the concept of curated. And what I mean by I'm not a believer in bad data is, if you tell me that the data is bad because there's no cost to it and there should be a cost, the fact that you have records and identify records that don't have a cost, they inform a different analytical process. You've got an operational issue where you've got products that are coming in or SKUs that are coming in without a cost. That is useful data. It helps inform something. Now, you may not want to show that to everybody in the user community. That's fine, but there's value to it. So I can take this in, apply the heuristics, and let users leverage this. And each time it loads, it'll curate what it needs to curate, flow it through to the business schema, and users can leverage it in the way they want to leverage it. And that can be done here. That can be inherited out of any number of technologies that are specialized in doing that level of data cleansing. So that capability is in Incorta, but the value is how we're handling and how we're holding the data. I don't want to lose that concept. And the last two things I'm going to show you here is I'm just going to talk very quickly about the incremental load capability, and then I want to show alerting. And I'm going to pause for the last, let's say, 10 minutes or so and see what questions you all may have. So we've had a few during the session, but I'd love to get some more. And we can do some impromptu demonstrations and even let you play a little bit. So the last two pieces, just for our quick overview today. The concept, first off, of the incremental loading, and then I'm going to show you the alerting capability and delivery capability. So earlier we did a load, and I did a full load. I also have the concept of an incremental load in Incorta. Now, all an incremental load is meaning that in a given environment, I can choose, does a table in a schema get loaded incrementally or does it get loaded full? And when I kick off one of those loads, scheduled or manually, through my command line or through the interface here, what's the behavior going to be? So if I look at my sales order detail table, there's a switch up here for incremental. And when I do that, I have a few options. I can do this from last successful load time. I can do this from a maximum value of another column. But what I'm really doing here is if I wanted to say, okay, hey, if I choose column, obviously it's going to have me pick up the column it wants me to incrementally load from. But if I choose something like extraction here, the question mark is a shorthand in Incorta, it says from last successful load time. So I'm using a timestamp, let's say. And so now when it does the load, if it does an incremental load, it'll look at and only load those records that have been updated since the last successful load time. And it does that it looks up that time, and we'll bring that in on the Incorta side. Now this leads to the concept very often of, okay, what if I want to understand, let's say, things as they change over time? Because right now, sales order ID comes in, or my sales order detail ID comes in. If it's the same one, it's going to overwrite the previous one. But if I just simply say, hey, no, my date also needs to be considered, now I can keep a running track of dates as that sales order ID, so I can see each time it's modified. And Incorta provides the capability to say, show me the last version, the first version. It's built into the platform. And so you can query and work with things over time like that. And so the last piece from a quick demonstration perspective is going to go the notification route. And this can be done from a dashboard perspective. This can be done from a more of a managerial or schema perspective. I can set up notifications inside of Incorta, and those will run, successes or failures based on our internal scheduler or our command line. And in fact, I could set the same thing up here. I can even do is user data notifications to say, okay, if something happens on a given dashboard, send me that dashboard, send it to me in one of these formats. And those can all be built out directly there, or even, frankly, right from the UI here. I could share this, I could schedule the delivery, but I can even here set an alert. And it will take you right to the same place, and it will alert me if something happens. And I can set up a data alert condition in here. Now, I don't want to get too much in the weeds on some of these things because we've got about 10 minutes left in the session. And what more important to me would be to understand what all what can we go through together? What questions might you have that would be would help you better understand and appreciate what we're doing on the Incorta side. So I'm going to pause, mute myself, just take a swallow of water and see if any questions pop up onto the chat window. And Tammy, thank you for all your help monitoring.
Mike, thank you for the demonstration. A lot of great information. I do have a few questions that came in from the audience while you were speaking that I thought I would save for the end here. One of the questions that came in is how large a data set, and maybe specifically how many rows can Incorta work with?
So it's hard to give you an exact number, just because it's going to depend on, okay, if I've got a data set full of integers, it's going to work a whole lot different than I got a data set full of strings. It's just a different concept. But the largest data set we are working with, and I'm aware of in our customer base, is about 34, 35 billion rows. And it goes down to, I'm trying to think, I can't give you the client name because it's not on the NDA, but it is a very large retail organization that does a lot of customer loyalty cards and provides it's a quick serve restaurant type of client, but it's about 35 billion rows of data on that coming out of their GL as well as a number of other systems. And they use that to help, in fact, frankly, manage food waste. They use it to look at store item level profitability. In their case, it's 28,000 locations and 18,000-ish product SKUs. And it's a very diverse environment. In fact, the reason I know about the loyalty cards is one of the things that they wanted to do in their particular cases, given that they do a lot of fresh food, baked goods in some instances, they have to know on a given day because that food will show up that day. And they want to, by the afternoon, be able to send alerts, texts out to their loyalty card folks that frequent that particular location to say, look, I've got a special going on right now on blueberry muffins, because they'd rather not throw them away. They'd rather be able to sell them. And of course, they donate what they don't sell. They don't throw it out. But they're leveraging that ability to see intraday data and understand to that level of detail to cut their overall food waste. And in fact, that by their estimates, some of the regions have cut food waste by up to 40% by having that information. But that's 34 to 35 billion rows in that particular instance.
Thank you. Next question from the audience here is, how live can the data be? The example this person was reading, the data once, what if you needed near real time?
So we support incremental loads as frequently as every 5 minutes. Now we don't have, I should say, but I do have a couple clients going that aggressive. A lot of my clients are intra-hour, not necessarily down to the 5-minute level. We can support down to as frequently as every 5 minutes. We also have a light remote query capability in Incorta if the data is in a data lake. And so you could be a little more frequent on that, but there will be performance implications to hitting that. And so it's generally used for data discovery. So if there is something that's critical to have in more frequently than that, then it's possible. But I would say a little more limited.
Excellent. Next question was, can this product read directly from SAS cubes as a data source?
So our connectors today, cube-wise, we have a connector to Essbase. And so I believe, my direct answer is I believe so. Let me look at something. So we have a connector out to Essbase, and the reason we have a connector out to Essbase is from a cube perspective is because we had a very large client that said, hey, we want a connector out to Essbase. Our connector, our infrastructure is extensible, pretty easy to change. So I don't have a connector to SAS, but what I'd have to look to see is if there are Python libraries to get to SQL Server, you could set something up very, very quickly. So as an example, TM1, there are Python libraries to get to TM1. I've connected Incorta out to TM1 via the Spark capabilities inside of Incorta. So that is, completely possible. And the ability, and so moreover, if there's a JDBC driver for SQL Server, or excuse me, for Microsoft Analysis Services, then it's very likely I can just drop the JDBC driver in here and use it. That's how I got to Snowflake as an example. I'm using a JDBC driver Snowflake provides, and I just registered it in the platform and connect that to Snowflake. So not out of the box today, but generally very, very quick to create. And if somebody else already has one, we can likely plug it in.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question just came in. Do you have a connector to a time series database? This individual, they have a PySensor data for hydros and transmission system.
So what do you know what when you say a time series database, what's the underlying technology? If I can ask.
I'll let you know if a response comes in here.
Okay, because a lot of those, the answer is going to be it depends. What is the underlying data structure to it? So from a connector's perspective, we have we have Oracle DB2, SQL Server, Postgres, and Redshift, and HANA Vertica Teradata. And it could very well be that we could leverage one of those existing connectors to go out to whatever that data source is, or this could also be a situation where I end up using Kafka to go to it, or I use a third-party connector.
Okay. If I get something more specific back from them,
yep,
they said they're not sure. So hopefully that answer helps. Another question that came through is there a desktop version for any offline scripting?
There is not today. So Incorta, it's great question. Incorta's UI is web-based. Primary UI is web-based. So it's HTML5 JavaScript, so no plugins or anything. We have an Excel plugin for consumption where users can do queries. We have an iOS application as well, but we don't have an offline. I don't have an offline that says I'm going to pull like this client you're seeing down and work with it. Now, if I'm doing something more advanced where I'm doing, like say, something with my Spark or PySpark or Spark SQL or R, things of that nature, yeah, you can use any offline client to write what you want. You can just drop literally that script in Incorta and work with it, but it's not going to be the full Incorta UI you're seeing that we've walked through.
Okay. Received another response from the attendee that was asking about the time series database. They responded that they are able to connect with the REST API. I don't know if that provides any more feedback for you.
Yeah, it will depend on which time series database that is. It's very possible. If there's a REST API out there, it's likely we can just wrap it in like a PySpark statement and go after it.
All right.
Yeah.
Looks like we have time for a couple more questions here.
Oh yeah.
Can we do prompts in the dashboards that you showed?
You can. Let me show you one. Hold on a second. All right, so on the dashboard here, come back out. And there's 3 dots in the upper right corner here. if I click on that, I have an option to manage filters and prompts. And I can hard filter a given dashboard. I can use dashboard variables and things of that nature, but if I want to do prompts, let's say I just want to do product category. And I drag that over, I'll turn it default. I'll say it's mandatory, and let's say I'm just going to grab, oh no, I grab product name, I meant to do category. Let's do that. Let's do category name here. I'll make it default, I'll make it mandatory, and I'll just grab all of them right now. Mandatory means I can't remove the prompt from the dashboard. So now when a user comes in, these prompts just sit up on the top here. And I can say, all right, I want to default to bikes or put bikes in. So you don't have to necessarily search. And I can have a whole series of these sitting up the top there. All right. Other questions that you may have out on the, did I lose you?
Sorry, we lost our feedback audio there for a moment.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Another question that came through, if I already have a reporting tool like Cognos, can I connect it to Incorta?
Yes. All right, so I don't have a Cognos environment up. So if it won't look bad to do this, I'll bring up a different UI because I don't have Cognos on my laptop. But if you're comfortable with it, I can throw a different UI up on top of this and you can see the similar data set. Or if Randy's on the call, I'll put Randy on the spot, we'll fire up Cognos environment. Or we can take that also offline for another demonstration another time. But yes, you can absolutely. So in the UI here, that we look just like a SQL database to those tools. And so whether it's Cognos or it's Tableau or Power BI, when they log in, given the user, they may just see, ideally, your user's just going to see this. They go into Cognos and they're like, hey, look, here's the information, here's the data I want to deal with, and they can play with it in Cognos. And you want to just set it up as a live query. And Incorta will just respond and send the data out. Very common in our deployments. So, and that really is when I go back to what our, when I was talking the architecture earlier, I know we built things in the Incorta UI today, but if Incorta was just a visualization interface, there's nothing we did in the visualization that is unique. Maybe a little of the search, but not really unique. It's how we handle the data. It's the data map that makes Incorta valuable and how we're holding that data. So we completely open it up, and that's the intention, to open it up to other platforms and tools to talk to us, because I do want to force a user community that has already adopted Cognos to say, hey, no, you got to get rid of all that. No, you can use it. Very common, especially if you are transitioning into an Incorta deployment. Even if you wanted to move 10% of your existing deployment out to something else, you don't do that right away. It's going to have to take, it will take time to do it. And so, yes, you can absolutely use that.
Hey, Mike and Michael, this is Randy, just chiming in real quick to point out the Cognos demonstration that Rachel Sue did yesterday in our day one session was all using Incorta as a backend.
Oh, perfect.
So for the Cognos UI, it looks like data, right? And she pulled that into a data module and used that. So the short answer was yes, but if you were involved or if you take a look at the recording from yesterday's Cognos session, it was Incorta as a backend.
Great, thank you for that contribution, Randy. Appreciate it. A couple other questions in our last few minutes here. Going back to the dashboards that you showed,
Sure.
A couple additional questions about those dashboards. One, can I embed images or HTML? And two, can I email those dashboards to users?
So yes and yes, there is an insight called rich text here. And it does allow for images and HTML. And I'm really bad at images are simple. I'm really bad at HTML. So let me cheat. Let's do this. We'll just do Let me do something like this. 20. There you go. There's your HTML. Little trick if, and then, you know, images, yes. I'm going to just grab an image here and let's go here. Should do it. Let's see if it'll come out. I probably had to save it a different way there, but to see if I can get it to come out. If not, but yes, you can set that up. All right. So of course I messed up the, you know, PM Squares logo. Well, I can fix that. And then in respect to the dash, yes. So right here, when I send these, and I can schedule this, schedule delivery, or I can send it now. You can, the users will receive those. In fact, I get a dashboard and a couple of them every day. And I get them all as HTML in my particular case. And then which tab you're going to deliver and everything else here.
Okay, great. Looks like we're just about out of time here, and I know that Ryan is probably going to want to use his full 2 hours when we transition over. Is there any other parting thought that you want to leave with our attendants?
Well, I just want you to thank you. I appreciate, well, thank you to PM Square, and thank you, of course, to everybody attending. I hope for those who followed along, I really, I know it's a lot. You're taking it over the last couple of days from, you know, Trifacta all the way through Incorta to the Cognos side. It's just an enormous amount of content. And so I appreciate you giving me the opportunity. Think of Incorta. Ultimately, Incorta is a different process. And that's what I want you to walk away with. The direct data mapping is the technical key, but it's the process change and the ability to answer that unanticipated question. The way we're handling that and providing that to support your curiosity, that's what we're trying to do. So happy to answer further questions via email. Again, thank you all for attending. I'll throw it back over to Chris, to you all, and have a wonderful rest of your day and rest to the Bacon Conference.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mike.